Welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast, the show that helps you, well, write better fiction. I'm Shane Miller, urban fantasy author, writing coach, and story geek, and each week I'll be talking to industry experts about the writing craft, publishing, and the business of being an author. Enjoy the show. Hello, Fictioneers, and welcome to episode 7 of the Write Better Fiction podcast. Today, I'm really excited because I'm chatting to Kris Spisak, the author of one of my favorite craft books of all time, the Novel Editing Workbook. Unsurprisingly, you'll pick up a ton of tips on how to self-edit your work, so stay tuned for that. But first, it's time for Question of the Week. Last week's question was, what was your biggest author goal? Angela Haas said, my biggest author goal is to sell my series to Netflix. For now, because I'm listening to your advice, I'll settle with publishing 2 books a year instead of 1. Herman Sternagel said, Netflix is the big goal, though Amazon Prime would be even better, but I would be much happier with being able to take my writing gig full time. Now, I agree with both of you on that. A Netflix or Amazon deal would be fantastic. It's one of the things that's on my big author goal bucket list too. And as for Herman's comment about being able to do this full time one day, I know Herman, I know how hard he works, and I have no doubt that he is going to be able to make it full time in this industry. And we'll all be here to celebrate when you do. And finally, Mary Van Everbroek said, I had an interesting experience while listening to Holly as far as my why and then how my why correlated to the biggest author goal. Through my writing, I want to help people fall back in love with themselves, and that is to appreciate and value themselves regardless of what they've experienced. And I'd like to do this for people through writing fiction. And Mary, I just want to say that is a fantastic, fantastic goal. And I know that you will succeed in doing that. So this week's question then is, what is your favorite part of the writing process and why? Okay, it's time for my update from the writing chair. Inspired by my chat with Holly about goal setting last week, I've spent this week seriously planning what I want the next 12 months of my author business to look like and what I want to achieve in the next year. Since I left my day job, I haven't been as driven to publish books as I was before, because the goal I'd always had with my writing was to escape the day job. And because, like Holly, I have futuristic as my number one Clifton strength, I realized I needed a plan that I'd been sorely lacking. So plan I did, and I'm happy to report that my motivation is fully back. I have some pretty big publishing and business goals for this year. I'm not going to share them right now, but I might and probably will do a lessons learned solo episode at some point to share my goals and the progress I've made towards those. If you want early access to episodes and exclusive access to the Fictioneer community on Discord, where you'll get to participate in things like Question of the Week and weekly accountability, you can support the Write Better Fiction podcast on Patreon for $5 a month. Support the show at patreon.com/writebetterfiction. And when I reach 50 patrons, I'm going to start recording a monthly Q&A episode where I answer your writerly questions. That's about it from me, so let's get into the interview with Kris. Hello, and welcome to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kris Spisak. Kris wrote her first 3 books, Get a Grip on Your Grammar, 250 Writing and Editing Reminders for the Curious or Confused, the Novel Editing Workbook, which I love, and the Family Story Workbook to help writers of all kinds sharpen their storytelling and empower their communications. Her debut novel, The Baba Yaga Mask, was inspired by her family's experience in the post-World War II Ukrainian diaspora and has been called a complex, poetic tale by Kirkus Reviews. Her 5th book, Becoming Baba Yaga, is forthcoming. When not working on her own projects, Kris is an active speaker, workshop leader, and creative strategist. Hi, Kris. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Shane. Wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, wonderful to have you here for sure. So I was wondering if you could start by telling us a bit about you and your journey into writing and editing.
Absolutely. Well, I think I am one of those, like yourself, probably like so many of your listeners, that I have been a writer and a storyteller for as long as I can remember. I remember in kindergarten working on those books. I remember in fourth grade having that inspiration of reading that amazing book that hit me and brought me to tears for the first time, and realizing fiction can do that. Fiction can be an emotional experience. Fiction can make you question the world that you live in. And it was fourth grade. In that moment, it hit me hard, and this is what I'm going to do with myself. I've explored many other things, but it always has come back to storytelling, and empowering communications, because as humans, we are storytellers. And I think it always has come back to empowering our language, empowering our story, whether it's truth, whether it's fiction, and the strategy of doing so. So I think that's just driven my professional existence, and personal for that matter.
Yeah. I love that. That's great. And I can clearly see how passionate you are about this, which is just perfect. So I wanted to start then by chatting about editing in general, because so many new writers, myself included when I was brand new, thought or think of writing and editing as fixing prose, but there's so much more to editing than just the prose. So what is
Right.
your what's your definition of editing, and how does it actually work?
And I'll relate this to a lot of the grammar jargon that we toss about. That, yes, we can talk about splint infinitives and all of this jargon that maybe people wince at. Maybe sometimes people have this urge to fall asleep, because you are imagining the teachers that you just despised when you were learning these things. There's a lot of jargon around editing. We can talk about the difference between editing and revision and and proofreading and all of these. And if you want to get into the nuts and bolts, yeah, there are major differences between all of these different styles of copy editing and story editing and all of these different pieces. I like it to keep it very simple. You have a macro edit, which is a big picture edit when you're looking at, does the story even make sense? As you said, a lot of people dive into editing and they just go to page one, chapter one. Let me start looking at grammar and punctuation. And that's not where anybody should start their editing process. You have to look at the macro edit, the big picture stuff. Does the story make sense? Are the characters real? Are they fleshed out? Then you go to the micro edit, where you're looking at, okay, let's empower those sentences. Make sure, in this competitive but awesome publishing landscape, how do we make our work stand out amidst the millions of other people writing right now? And then after you do the big story edit, the macro edit, after you do the big micro edit, that's when you get to that proofread where you are looking for perfection. But people sometimes skip to perfection before the story is even there. Maybe you're looking and perfecting a scene that was wonderful as a writer warm up for you as you were writing the book, as a draft, but maybe that scene was really good for you to experience because it got you where you needed to go. But as a reader, that scene maybe doesn't serve a purpose, and maybe it should be cut. So you have to go through all of the stages and not skip them, because again, this is a wonderful moment in history that anyone who wants to tell a story can. We all have voices and we should celebrate that. We all have ideas in our head. But if you want to be heard, if you want to be published, if you want to make money from your publications, you need to stand out amidst the crowd. And that's where you really need to take in all of the different stages of editing. And this, as you can tell, this is where I geek out.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm an editor myself, so I could geek out about this all day. But I will say, you said something really important there. You said, don't jump into prose straight away. And I think the thing that made me realize this is I would spend so long editing for prose and then have to cut loads of material. So you've just wasted like hours potentially going through all this stuff that you're not even going to use.
Days, months, weeks, and it's heartbreaking when you really are just spending, I mean, the writers know this. You can spend hours on a sentence, on a paragraph, just to make it perfect. But if you're perfecting this paragraph that really doesn't drive your story forward, that isn't enhancing characterization or your world, and you realize a month into your editing process that, oh my gosh, that entire first 3 pages of that chapter would be better if they were saved in a different file. That was a great creativity exercise that maybe parts of that will be used in a future project, but it doesn't serve this book. Oh, it's a waste of time. And it takes an awfully long time to write a book, so we don't want to waste our time.
Yeah, definitely. So as well as being a massive editing nerd, I'm a huge author mindset junkie. And in the Novel Editing Workbook, you talk about the need to have the right mindset and the right preparation in place before you start the self-edit. So how do you actually suggest the authors prepare before they do that self-edit?
And I love that you're asking that question, because mindset is something we have to think about as writers, because this is a difficult business. We are not signing up to do this easy little frolic through the fields where it's just happy and butterflies and all of this joy every single second. There's a lot of work involved. There's a lot of time involved. There's a lot of rejection involved. And that's one of those things that as writers, we need to find our thick skin. But when we are in the creation phase and we get to the end, I always tell people, yes, the editing revision stage is massive, and we need to take our time with that. But you know what? If you're even at a place with your writing where you are thinking about editing and revision, this is a moment for celebration. This is a moment where toss confetti into the air and pretend that they are commas falling all around you. Toast with your drink of choice. Go out for tacos with your friends. I have some writing friends where we celebrate with chocolates and fancy teas.
Nice.
When we finish, have different accomplishments. Think about what is a celebration for you, and take a moment to think about how many people say they've wanted to write a book. How many people have said they want to write a story? And if you just did it, even if it's a rough draft, even if it is hideous, but if you reach the end of a hideous first draft, think about how far ahead you are above so many other people. So I always tell people, celebrate, celebrate, celebrate yourself, and think about the accomplishment, even if it's not yet perfect yet. There's time, there are tools, there is a step-by-step process how you can do this. Yes, that is absolutely self-promotion there for the novel editing
Go
workbook.
for it.
But there is a process for how you can edit. People talk so much about the creation, and that's where this book came from. Is people talk so much about the writing process, but not very many people talk about step-by-step tactics of the editing and revision. And that's where this book came from.
Yeah,
I
definitely. And
veered from your question.
no, it's fine. It's definitely one of those books that, because some craft books, I say a lot, some craft books can be very abstract and they don't actually have like a step-by-step or this is actually what you need to do this thing. And that's why I wanted you to come on the show, because your book is definitely like a step-by-step. If you follow these steps, you'll end up with a really solid manuscript that you can then work with however you choose to do that, which we'll come to later. But while we're on you mentioned the macro edit, which is obviously the bigger stuff, the story related things. So story structure, what are some of the tips and tricks that you'd recommend writers to use to structure their stories when they first start with that macro edit?
Sure. My favorite thing to ask people when they finish that rough draft, you have that celebration of where you are and how far you've come. When you're thinking about that macro edit, you have to make sure the big pieces fall into place before you can think about anything little. So what I like to think about is, can you, as an author, put in just a couple sentences, what is your book about? And it's an interesting challenge, and it's a challenge you can do at any point in the writing process. You can do it before you even start your manuscript, and you can use it as a guide as you're writing. You can do it at the finishing point where you say, okay, what was this book about? It's great for those who are thinking about traditional publication and you're thinking about querying. It's great for those who are thinking about the description on the back of your book or putting up on Amazon. It's a great exercise for anybody at any point. However, as you're entering the macro editing phase, I like thinking about it and asking, what is this book about? And then look at every single chapter of your book. Is every single chapter of your book about that? And it's interesting as an exercise, and I sometimes can get very granular into this, and we talk about how we can create a post-first draft outline and really checking all the nitty-gritty with all of this, make sure every scene is somehow on the point of your book, on the drive of your book, on the narrative drive, that everything is focused. But if you ask yourself what those two sentences are, or one sentence, if you're really good, if you can get it down to one sentence, and you check every single chapter, is this on point? is this on the mission of your book? Then suddenly you're going to realize, oh my gosh, I have this 40-page tangent that was hilarious, but had nothing to do with the plot of my book. Or I had this research that I found that was brilliant, and I just had to tell my readers all about it. But I kind of went off on this tangent for 10 pages. Or you're finding all of these little things that are off the point of the book. Now, this is not to say that we don't have plots and subplots and all of this. So maybe you can think about them kind of the multiple missions of your book, the multiple plot lines of your book. But if you can write down in a sentence or two kind of what's the point, what is happening in the story, and then you check every single chapter against that piece of paper, that index card, that sticky note, all of a sudden you're going to catch where your readers might be closing your book because they were really into your plot and now it's wandering and they're not as interested, no matter how hilarious it is, no matter how witty it is. If you wander away from your plot, you lose your readers. And the last thing you want is to lose your readers. So that's one of my favorite macro tips, is just make sure your plot is staying on point.
Yeah, and I guess that would solve the issue that many new writers have where, you know, the character wakes up and they brush their teeth and they get breakfast and they go through the routine of their day, but it's not actually anything to do with the story.
Again, I call those the writer warm-ups sometimes. That sometimes you start a chapter and you talk about the weather. And you start a chapter and the character is sliding their feet into their slippers and they are pouring their orange juice and they are doing all of these little steps that, you know what, it helped you get there. So good. Maybe that's how you wake up with your day, but you want to write your story as a story, not just all of these things that are unique. Now, of course, if they wake up and there's a stranger hovering over their bed, this might be an important piece.
Yeah.
But if it is just kind of routine, they're taking a shower, they're getting dressed, they're looking in the mirror and describing themselves from head to toe. You got to watch out for cliches and you got to watch out for the speed bumps in your story. And sometimes you're right, those wake up scenes sometimes can be cut with great results for cutting them.
Yeah, but great point about if they're waking up and something's actually happening, that's fine. Yeah.
Exactly. There are a lot of red flags that you hear about. You want to avoid the waking up scenes. You want to avoid starting a chapter with the weather. But if this is a plot about a hurricane and this is there are ways you can break all the rules. There are no rules to this. There are red flags that editors and agents and publishers see as you're walking into a cliche. And you got to watch out for those and learn what they are. And there are many guides that can help you learn what those are. But again, break any rules. You just have to know the rules before you break them.
Yeah, exactly. That's brilliant. And then we hear all the time as well, moving on from plot to character, that readers, your character needs to be like really relatable. That's super important. So staying on that, what are some of the key things that writers can do to make sure they are actually writing characters that resonate with readers?
Right. I always tell people characters can sometimes be cartoons, where you think about cartoons you maybe looked at when you were a child, and whatever cartoon it was would maybe hold up a sign. I'm thinking of Wile E. Coyote or Roadrunner campaign, where you hold
Yeah.
up a sign and it says yikes. And characters will hold up these signs in your writing sometimes where they say, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm nervous. Well, you know what? How can you, this is that classic show versus tell advice. I love talking about that in terms of emotions. Because think about someone who you know, think about your best friend, think about a relative. When they walk into the room, they don't have to hold up a sign saying, I'm kind of scared right now. I'm kind of depressed right now. I'm kind of giddy right now, whatever the emotion is. If you know someone well, they will walk into the room and the way they are carrying themselves, the way they are holding something, just their demeanor, you know them, so you see their emotion without ever having to have them hold up a sign saying, I am insert emotion here. And that's your challenge with your characters. How can you create them, craft them in a way that your reader will feel so intimately close with them that the way they behave will be those signposts, will be those clues for exactly what emotions they are experiencing at this given moment. And you can take this challenge one step further to make it even stronger as a project. How can your protagonist have emotional clues that are different from a side character, which are different from an antagonist? Because think about it. Think about your mom versus your dad. Think about a sibling versus a friend. The way we carry ourselves, the way I show happy is different from how you show happy. If you have every single character smiling maniacally all over the place, it, I mean, again, I pick on smiling just because it's one of those things. As an editor who has read many, many early manuscripts, we sometimes rely on smiling and frowning and sighing, and
Yeah.
there is nothing wrong with any of these words. However, if you are overusing them for every single character, you know what? Maybe smiling means nervous for this one character, and maybe smiling means, I mean, insert how many emotions there are in the world, but think about subtleties of movement, of action, of demeanor, of how we are holding ourselves that separate emotions, and just think about demonstrating emotions, because how close do you want your reader to be to your characters? That's what drives us forward, right? Yes, plot, yes, the drive of the book. But when you feel truly attached to a character, when you can read them, it's an emotional connection. And when you, as an author, can create that with your characters, between your readers and your characters, that's amazing.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you kind of spoke about body language there, and the smiling, the sighing, all those common things that that kind of first time and some more experienced authors do. They're always littered through my first drafts for sure. Also, I wanted to bring up, talking of body language, like weird body language that the author might use for every character as well. I remember reading Divergent, and one of the things that every single character seemed to do was pick their cuticles when they were nervous. And that is a very
Right.
specific like action to
Right.
take.
No, and it was funny because sometimes we have those things. I was reading a book recently too that whenever one of the characters was nervous, he rubbed the back of his neck, and that was his thing. And you knew this character was nervous. But then there was this one chapter later in the book, and this was a published book. Um, it was like a police officer or something later in the book started rubbing the back of his neck, and it was almost off-putting because that was such a clue of this one major character that when someone else does this, it's like, wait a second, but that's his cue. You shouldn't be doing that. So yes, it's one of those things we are not always aware of our own writing tics, if you will, and be aware of them character to character, and our own favorite things, ways we describe things, movements we give our characters, little phrases. I have a phrase that I used to use all the time that I was completely unaware of, that someone pointed out to me, that I always use the phrase couldn't help but, that a character couldn't help but whatever. And it was this phrase that I used throughout all of my stories. And someone pointed it out to me, and I didn't notice it. Someone else had to be there. And that's why it's so great to have beta readers. That's why it's so great to have critique partners and editors and all of these other people, to have those eyes beyond yourself. Because sometimes you know your story so well, things like that slip through the cracks.
Yeah, definitely. So talking of description, let's talk about setting. So it's really important to make sure readers feel immersed in setting, as we all know. So what are some of the ways that writers can really deepen their setting?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question, because sometimes setting can feel so superficial. It's a coffee shop, it's a walk in the woods, it's a beach. And we've been to these places. We know what they look like. So a writer feels like maybe they don't have to try so far because the reader's with us. But what is the difference between your cafe and somebody else's cafe? What's the difference? And this is where I always recommend to think about specificity. I tell people to think about a setting in their book, or maybe the 5 major places where your characters happen to be, and see if you can write down a list of 20 different specific things about this place. And 20 seems like this outrageous number, but what are you going to write? You're right. Okay, so we're talking about a cafe. There will be tables, there will be chairs, there will be people. I say 20 because the first 5 things you think about are going to be the same 5 things everyone's going to think
Yeah.
about. And again, competitive world that the publishing space is right now, you don't want to write everybody else's cafe. You want to write your cafe. So if you push yourself to think about all of these details, this rough draft cafe suddenly is alive with this specific smell that is not just the smell of coffee beans, but there's this smell of, I don't know, this mocha almond cheesecake that's their specialty, that's woven in. And you know what? I haven't heard about that mocha almond cheesecake. I'm making myself hungry as I'm
Yeah,
talking.
yeah.
that's specific to your world, not to every single other cafe you've ever written or read. So you want to think about specificity and again, using your senses. I've already kind of gone in that direction, that you want to be thinking about sights and sounds and smells, not just relying on your eyes, because we rely on our eyes so much in our rough drafts sometimes, but really thinking about specificity with all of our senses. And if we're eating things, dive into that taste.
Yeah, that's really good. And some of those underutilized senses like taste can be really evocative, can't they? If we use
Exactly.
them. Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. And this is probably more of a micro editing thing, but in terms of the senses, let's talk about filtering. I hadn't necessarily prepped you for this in advance, but it just
Okay.
popped in my head as we were talking about setting. What is filtering and how can people avoid it?
Okay, and if I'm hearing your question correctly, I'm going to take this as I think you're saying it.
Mm,
So, as we're talking about senses and we're talking about description, something that a lot of people do when they're doing their description of their characters, they talk about how he smelled the roasted coffee beans, or
yeah.
she saw the way the napkins were folded on the table. And again, these are the subtleties that bring good writing to amazing writing. What if you took away those sensory words? What if it wasn't he smelled the whatever it is he's smelling, but what if the subject of your sentence was the thing? What if the subject of your sentence was that mocha cheesecake or whatever it is that I just said? And you start with that sense and you go there. So often our description again, is there anything wrong with this in a rough draft? No, anything goes in a rough draft. Again, confetti all over the place for getting to that rough draft. But when you are cleaning up that rough draft, this is where you can say, okay, my favorite editing tool is the find function, which you can use in whatever word processor that you're using. You can use it in Scrivener, you can use it in Word, you can use it in Pages, keep going, whatever you're using it in. Is search for all of your basic sensory words. So look for the word look, for example, using the find function, look for the word look. And all of a sudden, by using the find function, you're going to look, oh gosh, now this is going to be complicated because you are going to discover the word look everywhere you use it in your manuscript. And you can jump from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And you're going to find every single instance where a character looked at something. And then every single time by using the find function, you can then delete that, tighten that sentence, empower those sentences one by one. Using the find function, look for watch, look for smell, look for taste, look for feel. And all of a sudden, by searching out these sensory words, they're little landmarks for you to go through your entire manuscript and search out specifics that you can empower sentence by sentence. Clearly, you want to be paying attention to them. You don't just want to delete 3 words and move on. You want to make sure the sentence makes sense. But again, I love cheats. In my book, I have so many different things where I am all about the find function. You can use it for so many different pieces of empowering your editing process. I also had a series for Writer's Digest that I wrote about a year ago that really walks through all of these little ways that you can empower your writing step by step. Because again, we know we need to do it. But how? How do we empower our writing? And there are tricks and tips that you can follow to make it happen.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why we recommend your book for sure.
Thank you.
Definitely. So as we're kind of moving on to micro editing, let's shift to that completely. What are some of the most common issues that you see in terms of micro edit? So those prose things, perhaps some copy editing things, and how can we go about fixing those?
So often we know in our minds what something is supposed to say. And I have faith that every single listener to this episode, to your show, is a brilliant writer. There's everyone here is smart. We are smart people. We know how grammar works. We know the difference between there and there and there. We know the difference between it's and where that apostrophe goes. However, when we are in that creative Zen state and we are just rolling, mistakes happen. That we're human. We can't penalize ourselves for them. We can't feel depressed about, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I mistook this two for the wrong two. We're human. We're in a zone. Things happen. Who cares? It's the editing where we fix. And sometimes when we are proofreading our own work, we know what it's supposed to say, and we act like readers rather than editors. And especially when we're in the midst of the scene that is so emotional, or we love it because we were so darn witty the way we wrote that paragraph, we are so proud of ourselves that sometimes the editor hat falls off and we start reading, and enjoying it. And again, yay, confetti all over the place. Enjoy your brilliance. However, when you are being an editor of your own work, when you're in that self-editing mode, we need to be meticulous. So really, that's my biggest thing that I see with proofreading. It's not one particular mistake, although if you want to go into particulars of word choice, that's where my first book came from, called Get a Grip on Your Grammar. And we can talk all about word choice and punctuation and storytelling there. Um, However, what I always recommend to people is when you're editing your own work, especially, but this is true as an editor yourself, as an editor myself, when you're editing anybody's work, there is only so much mental um, mental attention that you can give something at any given time. If you give yourself, you know what, I'm going to take the day off and today I'm going to edit my book. Awesome. Do it. However, don't spend hours and hours and hours on the proofread, because if you do so, at some point your editor hat's going to fall off and you are going to be reading. You're going to have that entire place. This is where the muddle in the middle of your book happens, because your start is going to be brilliant if you take the time, if you do the work. Your first couple chapters, your first 20, 30 pages are going to be wonderful, because you know what? You're going to be paying attention as you start, because so many people start on page one. However, at some point, you're going to start reading. So, what I always tell people is to give yourself little health breaks, little mental health breaks in the middle of it. And I'm not saying you can't do a day of editing, do a day of editing, but put a timer on your cell phone for 10 minutes, for 20 minutes, whatever you think your honest attention span is. And this is a different thing. Maybe it's 5 minutes, and you know what? That's okay. And give yourself a break. This doesn't mean take a break for half an hour and play on Instagram for half an hour. Although, if anybody wants to follow me on Instagram, I'm there too. Um, I mean, stand up, touch your toes 3 times, stretch, sit back down. This can be a 30-second brain break, but giving yourself a 30-second brain break helps you so much, just to keep that level of focus. I will say, though, I was once on a deadline and I was proofreading, I was trying to do all this stuff, and I decided to use it as a physical challenge where I was doing it push-ups and crunches, and I had it at 10 minutes because it was very meticulous, that I needed to make sure everything was absolutely perfect. I had a timer on my cell phone. Every 10 minutes, I was going to give myself a break. So I pretty much did it to have a break, do 5 push-ups, go back to it, have a break, do like 20 crunches, go back to it. And this was like this month where I was on this really tight deadline. I was in better shape at the end of that. And you don't think about writers being in awesome shape because we're sitting at our desks. I was in better shape at the end of that massive editing month than in years. It was great.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I remember that was actually one of the key points in the book that stuck with me, because I am one of those people, I was, that would sit there and just like zone in. But you're right, the editor hat falls off, and giving yourself, it's silly, like these small things that we can do that we don't even think of. But that
Right.
micro change to my routine of, right, set a timer for 10, 15 minutes, do the 30-second brain break, come back to it. It's amazing how much difference that can actually make.
Exactly. I mean, we are built not to have this focus on this meticulous level for so long. We are human. We have bodies. We are not just floating brains. Get the blood flowing. I mean, it's, again, go to the kitchen, pour a glass of water, come back. Go to the bathroom. I mean, this doesn't have to be complicated. I sometimes get overly into fitness and health. So if you're not that person, that's cool. You don't have to do push-ups and crunches.
Yeah,
Go to
Kris
the
said
kitchen.
do push-ups.
Yes, Kris said do push-ups. This is your new training regimen. No, feel free if you are so inclined. If you're not so inclined, stretch your hands over your head, stretch your hand to the sides, take a sip of water. And you know what? You got your blood flowing. It can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. However, if you want to make it complex, you can get in amazing shape during your edit.
So much the better. Yeah, definitely. So a lot of people will probably get to the end of your book. They'll have followed all the tips, the tricks. They'll have done everything that you've suggested, and they'll be thinking, right, I've followed all Kris's fantastic advice now, so the book is done. Do I really need to hire a professional editor? So I know your opinion on this. Obviously, it's the same as mine. But why is it important for writers to work with professional editors even after they've self-edited their work?
Oh, I'm so happy you're going here. Um, it's so important to have eyes besides your own on your work because you know it, you love it. Self-editing is, you can do so much of this work on your own. Don't feel like you'd have a rough draft, you hand it over to an editor and they will make it all pretty and shiny. That's not how editors work. You have the creativity inside of you that brought this to whatever level you're bringing it. This is where you get to push it as far as you can possibly push it. However, we live in a competitive publishing landscape. This is not just a matter of, if your goal is to get your book out into the world, that's one thing. If your goal is to get it out into the world and for it to do well, whether you're traditionally publishing, whether you're independently publishing, however, or hybrid publishing or anything in the middle, whatever your goal is, if you want to sell books, you need to make sure it is as powerful as possible. A lot of time you can start with a critique partner, have a beta reader, somebody else reading your work, just starting to find those little bugaboos that are hiding in there that you didn't even realize that were this flaw, that this end of chapter 7 makes no sense. But you're like, no, it makes total sense. Let me explain it to you. If you have to explain a chapter to someone, that means it might not yet be there. Because remember, when a reader is experiencing your book, you as the author are not going to be like, no, 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 it's actually really brilliant. This is what it's supposed to mean. And they're going to go, oh, you don't have that relationship with a reader. A reader takes the book as it is, whatever the experience is. So having that extra pair of eyes can be powerful, whoever that first pair of eyes is. Now, especially if you are independently editing, or excuse me, independently publishing, if you are self-publishing, eyes, 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 get eyes on that manuscript, get multiple eyes on that manuscript, especially when it comes to proofreading. This needs to be polished. Editors are essential in the proofreading stage of this. It will be all the more advanced if you work with a story editor, work with a copy editor. There are editors that specialize in developmental edit. There's so many different names for all of these, and we can go into that in a whole other podcast of all the editing, the terminology.
Yeah.
But other eyes help. Other professional eyes can take you to the next level. I mean, who doesn't love a family member reading your book and giving you a hug and saying, that was really well done, that was interesting? But I mean, how helpful is that in terms of advancing your book? Yay, again, confetti in the air.
Yeah.
You want to seize upon those moments because there are hard moments in the writer's life too. But professional eyes can take things further, not farther, unless there's a road trip involved, and that's a whole other story. But these are the subtleties. Editors know the difference between further and farther. Editors know the difference between uninterested and disinterested, and all of these subtleties that, you know what, even though English might be your first language, there are subtleties of semicolons that everyone is not completely comfortable with. And editors know this, and editors will ensure your writing is as polished as possible. For those who are thinking about traditionally published, do you need an editor? Maybe. I'm not going to say yes or no to this. If you are doing a query letter and that query letter is getting a request of a partial or a full manuscript, but then you keep heading roadblock, 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 okay, so maybe you need some further assistance to figure out, how do I break through something that is stopping this from progressing further? Yes, publishers have editors at their houses and all of this, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you can deliver something of lower quality. Because if you're delivering something of lower quality, even in a pitch, it's not going to be picked up. A book needs to be amazing to be traditionally published. And if you're doing it yourself, it should be amazing for the sake of your own goals, for your relationship and future success with your readers who are going to trail after everything you do ever after. Because you want those readers to trail after you ever after, don't you?
Yes. Yeah, you really do. You've spoken about word choice a couple of times in the interview, and and this is going to be a bit of a rabbit hole because I'm a bit of a nerd with wordy stuff. But I remember speaking to a writer who they'd said the editor had given very vague advice about using strong verbs, and they didn't really know what a strong verb was, as opposed to like an adverb, for example. So what is a strong verb and why are they good?
Oh, we could, again, we could talk for days, couldn't we? Okay. So I'll go in two directions with this question. My favorite ways to go. If you've ever seen the movie The Dead Poets Society, and you have Robin Williams as this teacher of English who's talking about enhancing, oh, he's talking about adjectives. Oh, well, same point applies.
Yeah.
He's talking about they were not very sad, they were morose, and just thinking about what is the right word. So if, again, you're putting very in front of an adjective, maybe that's not the right word. Maybe there's something else. And it's the same thing with verbs. If you're thinking you're walking quietly, well, no, maybe you're tiptoeing. If you're thinking about you're running fast, well, no, maybe you're sprinting. If you are using a verb paired with an adverb, maybe that is just telling you you haven't found the right verb yet. I won't go as far as, who is it, Stephen King, who said the road to hell is paved with adverbs.
Yeah.
I won't go that far. I'm not completely anti-adverb. However, adverbs are often clues for when your verbs could just be a stronger word choice. Because again, you don't want to sound like everybody else. Maybe so many people are talking about walking quietly, but you want to be tiptoeing. You want this specificity because that too many words slows down the reading process. And you want your readers to be on the edge of their seat as they're going through all of this. Going back to that find function that I talk about, again, it's my favorite editing tool. Look for just ly in your manuscript. And at first you're like, oh my gosh, what is the point of this? All adverbs, Kris, do not end in ly. I know. However, a lot of adverbs do end in ly. And if you search for ly, suddenly using the find function, you can jump from ly adverb to ly adverb as you're going through your manuscript. And it's a really quick way to check yourself and think, where are the weak verbs? Where am I protecting my verbs with this weak adverb? But if I find a completely new word, it might be elevated on the whole. This will completely backfire if you have a character named Emily or a character named Lydia. But besides those, and there's probably some other scientific jargon in there, that there's many things that probably mess this up. But again, if you cheat and you look for ly, you can find all the places where you use ly adverbs paired with a verb, and suddenly brilliance occurs. Also, in rough drafts, we love the verb to be. We love was. We love were. Is there anything wrong with the verb to be? No, of course not. We use it all the time. However, there's paragraphs where if every single verb in an entire paragraph is was or were or is or are or will or whatever form we're talking about, that doesn't really pull us in and hook us and drive us forward as much as a more powerful choice. So again, it's one of those things. If you're a crazy person, or no, if you are meticulous in your editing process, this is what I do when I finish the manuscript for the Baba Yaga Mask. Before I continued on with my pitching, I went through a find function and I searched for the word was. And I went through this process, and all of a sudden I was just pointed to all of these sentences where I could enhance things. Does this mean I have to change every single one? Of course not. However, it points out paragraphs where, you know what, this paragraph used were 5 times.
Yeah.
No, I want to make this experience multifaceted for my reader. I want to hook them. I don't want to just be repetitive again and again and again. So again, these are little subtleties with word choices where you can empower yourself, stand above the crowd, sell more books, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is off topic, but you mentioned your Baba Yaga Mask book there, and I'm fascinated by anything mythological. I'm a fantasy author, so obviously I'm going to be fascinated by that. And that particular myth is one of the most chilling, fascinating myths that there is. So can you talk to us a bit about why you're so fascinated with that myth, and like maybe your writing process for the book as well? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I am Ukrainian by birth. I grew up with Ukrainian dance, Ukrainian art, Ukrainian language. So first things first, for the fact of my book club fiction, women's fiction, based on my own Ukrainian heritage, to come out in 2022 of all years has been a profound experience. And I've been so honored to talk about so many things and do donation drives, and so many pieces of people didn't know about Ukraine until recently. And so being able to have those conversations has been surreal and emotional. But in terms of Baba Yaga herself, she is, as you said, she's an amazing myth. She's not just this witch that is this Disney character of evil. She's incredibly complex, who she is challenging characters who come upon her to be better versions of themselves. And yes, she might eat you, or she might help you have all your dreams come true if you are brave enough, if you are smart enough, if you are good enough in your heart. And again, she's fascinated me for the longest time. So, as I said, I've been looking since I was 4 years, not 4 years old, in fourth grade. I've been trying to write different versions of fiction. And one of the first versions I was trying to write was this World War II story of my grandparents, is what they went through as they left Ukraine during World War II. Because as I was going through history classes and growing up, I never heard the Ukrainian version of World War II stories. There are many World War II stories out there, but I never heard the Ukrainian story. But I knew that story so well from my own family dinner table conversations. I was waiting for it. So I played with versions of it. This is fiction. This is not anywhere close to my grandparents' story, but just the idea of Ukrainian heritage fiction and Ukrainian heritage fiction that touches on World War II. I was trying to write that and write that and write that for years. I tried it in poetry. My first ever publication was a poem that played with my Ukrainian heritage. I played with it in memoir. I played with it in all sorts of different ways. And finally, I stumbled upon it, and there was kind of a twofold answer to how it finally hit me. Is I had an idea about a grandmother who declared that she needed to see the old country before she died, because she left during World War II and hadn't been back since. And what would happen if that really stubborn 92-year-old grandmother stepped off a plane in Eastern Europe and then disappeared? And then her family back home is saying, is she sick? Is she hurt? Did something happen? Or is she up to something? Because she's often up to something. So I had this idea that struck me of like, that's a really fun premise of a quest for a lost grandmother who may or may not be up to something, and unpacking family history and world history along the course of it. So that's the premise of the Baba Yaga Mask. But what if this Ukrainian grandmother is also absolutely obsessed with Baba Yaga stories? And so throughout this whole, it's a mix between historical contemporary fiction, but throughout the whole thing are these Baba Yaga tales that the granddaughters who are questing after their grandmother and what happened to her, they're kind of whispering these stories like codes of bravery between each other, as these feminist tales, as these empowering tales, as these horrifying tales with these two sisters. And I just thought she was such a interesting premise to play with. She's not a character in my book, but she is at the same time, because she's woven throughout my fiction. As I've said, everything that I write, whether it's fiction, whether it's nonfiction, really just talks about the empowerment of language, the empowerment of story, whether it's your family story, whether it is a classic story that the world has told forever and ever, or in that case, I mean, Baba Yaga is thousands of years
Yeah.
old. She's fascinating. And of course, there's so many versions, and so many versions. She is just purely evil,
Yeah.
living in her house that stands on chicken legs. Oh my gosh, she's fabulous. But yes, my next book, my fifth book, I just signed the publishing contract about a month ago, is a nonfiction. I'm going back to nonfiction, talking about Baba Yaga,
Oh,
and how
nice.
she relates to our modern mindset, because there are things we can learn from classic fables, no matter what culture those fables come from. And Baba Yaga, being someone who is taken from my own family history, not or my family legacy, she's just one I have always loved. So I'm geeking out again, so exploring the myth and history and cultural value of her. But yes.
Oh, that is fascinating. And it does bring me nicely onto my favorite question of the entire show. This is the Write Better Fiction podcast. So, Kris Spisak, why do you write fiction?
Mm. I write fiction because I read somewhere once that the goal of a novelist is not to answer questions, but to ask them. And I write fiction because there are so many questions that we as a world need to think about. And I don't have all the answers, but I like evoking the questions and the conversations. And maybe Baba Yaga will challenge us to be better people. And maybe empowering our language will empower our professional and personal future and legacy. Fiction is transformative for the writer and the reader. And I write fiction to quest after that.
That is amazing and a great way to end the show. So can you tell everyone a little bit about where they can find you and everything you do online?
Absolutely. So you can go to krisspisak.com, and I'll make it really easy for you because no one knows how to spell my last name. You can also go to noveleditingworkbook.com, which will redirect you right over to my website. I play a lot on Instagram, especially with language and story histories and tips and all sorts of just reminders as writers, reminders as storytellers, reminders as people who speak, people who write, because we're all writers. No matter what we do sticky notes to our kids and text messages, and we are all writers, and it's fascinating to explore that. So yes, follow along. I also have a monthly newsletter where I share a lot of tips and trivia and expand on many ideas. And I will also say, in addition to my books, I do also offer online courses on how to edit fiction and how to empower your own memoir or fiction with your own personal memories and experiences. Again, that's all on my website. But for those who like to have a little bit more hand holding on a step-by-step of the editing process, I have courses that you will have access to for 12 solid months as you are going through the process. So again, as you can tell, I love chatting about this stuff and helping us all empower our stories.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Kris. That was great.
Thank you so much, Shane.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Kris and picked up a ton of actionable tips on how to self-edit your work. Join me next week when I'll be chatting to the host of the Indie Author Podcast, Matty Dalrymple, all about selling short fiction. Have a great writing week. Thanks for listening to the Write Better Fiction podcast. Remember to hit subscribe on your favorite podcatcher and leave a review, and we'll chat again next time.